Not yet. Marcus Reed said it so quietly that Officer Ryan Whitaker almost missed it, but Darius Cole heard every syllable. The metallic click of the handcuff closing around Marcus's wrist sounded strangely loud beneath the elm trees of Riverside Memorial Park, louder than the laughter of children near the playground, louder than the distant traffic rolling along the avenue, louder even than the police radio murmuring from Whitaker's cruiser 20 feet away. Darius stood beside the wooden bench with his hands visible, his jaw tight, watching the officer with the controlled stillness of a man forcing himself not to react. Whitaker mistook that restraint for fear. He had no idea the two black men in front of him were federal agents, and even less idea that Marcus could have ended this entire encounter with two words, FBI agent. But Marcus didn't say them. Instead, his eyes moved past Whitaker's shoulder toward the parking lot on the west side of the park, where a man in a gray jacket had just stepped out from behind a row of parked cars. That man mattered. The handcuffs did not. At least not yet. "You two have been sitting here long enough," Whitaker said, his voice carrying the confidence of someone convinced no explanation could possibly challenge his authority. Marcus looked at him calmly. "Sitting on a park bench isn't a crime, officer." Whitaker's expression hardened. "I didn't ask for your opinion." A few people nearby had begun to notice. A woman walking a golden retriever slowed her pace. A father near the basketball court glanced over. Someone farther down the path raised a phone, uncertain whether they were recording something serious or merely strange. Darius looked at Marcus again. The signal between them was almost invisible. Wait. They had been waiting nearly an hour for the man in the gray jacket to make contact with someone connected to a federal investigation that had taken months to build. One careless move could destroy it. One flash of credentials could send the target walking away before the FBI ever learned who he was meeting. Whitaker stepped closer to Darius. "Identification." Darius answered evenly. "Are we being detained?" The question seemed to irritate him more than defiance would have. "You don't get to question me." Marcus heard a faint voice through the hidden earpiece tucked beneath his collar. "Target moving. East side. Hold position." He kept his face neutral. The assignment was still alive. Barely. Whitaker reached toward the second pair of cuffs on his belt. Darius shifted half a step, then stopped when Marcus spoke again. "Not yet." This time Whitaker heard it. He gave a humorless smile. "Not yet what?" Marcus didn't answer. His attention stayed on the reflection in the glass of a coffee kiosk across the walkway. Gray jacket. 30 yards away. Moving slowly. Watching. Then something changed. The man in gray looked toward Whitaker, and Whitaker, just for a fraction of a second, looked back. Marcus felt the entire situation tilt. This was no longer just an interruption. Maybe Whitaker had picked the wrong two men by accident. Or maybe he had not picked them by accident at all. Marcus slowly turned his eyes back to the officer. "You should be very careful about what you do next." Whitaker tightened his grip on the second pair of cuffs. "I know exactly what I'm doing." Marcus held his gaze, calm as ever. That was the moment Whitaker should have walked away, because the two men he thought he was controlling were no longer wondering how to protect their cover. They were beginning to wonder whether Officer Ryan Whitaker was part of the reason they had been sent to that park in the first place. 47 minutes earlier, Riverside Memorial Park had looked ordinary enough to make danger feel impossible. Late afternoon sunlight slipped through the elm branches and scattered across the walking paths in long golden bands. Children shouted near the playground. A basketball struck pavement in a steady rhythm. Somewhere beyond the trees, traffic moved along Jefferson Avenue with the low constant sound of a city finishing its workday. Marcus Reed and Darius Cole sat on the same weathered wooden bench as if they had nowhere else to be. Marcus wore a charcoal jacket over a plain shirt, while Darius had chosen jeans and a navy windbreaker. Nothing about them suggested federal law enforcement. That was exactly the point. From the bench, Marcus could see the eastern entrance of the park without turning his head. A glass-fronted coffee kiosk 25 yards away reflected the west parking lot behind him, giving him a second field of vision without making it obvious that he was watching anything at all. Darius checked his watch, then leaned back with the relaxed posture of a man waiting for a friend. "For minutes late," he said quietly. Marcus kept his eyes on the kiosk reflection. People carrying secrets rarely follow schedules. Beneath his collar sat a nearly invisible communication device, small enough that no passerby would notice it. His federal credentials remained hidden inside an inner pocket, untouched and intentionally forgotten. The assignment depended on appearing unimportant. For nearly 6 months, a joint federal investigation had followed a network suspected of selling protected personal information to criminals who used it to identify witnesses, investigators, and confidential sources. The man Marcus and Darius were waiting for was not considered the leader. He was more useful than that. He was the bridge. The Bureau believed he would meet someone in the park, exchange a small encrypted storage device, and then lead investigators toward the person giving the orders. Marcus heard Elena Brooks through the concealed earpiece. All teams maintain distance. No contact unless the package changes hands. Darius adjusted his sleeve. Understood. Marcus said nothing. Across the lawn, an older couple passed with matching paper cups. A jogger moved along the lake. Everything remained calm, but Marcus had learned long ago that calm was often where important things hid. Then a gray sedan entered the west lot. Darius noticed it without looking directly toward it. Possible arrival. Marcus watched its reflection in the kiosk glass. The driver's door opened. A man in a gray jacket stepped out, checked his phone, and began walking toward the center path. Marcus felt the operation tighten around them like an invisible net. Then another vehicle appeared. Black and white. Marked. Local police. It rolled slowly along the curb beside the park before, stopping near the basketball court. Darius glanced toward Marcus. That ours? No. The cruiser remained still for several seconds. Behind the windshield sat Officer Ryan Whitaker, watching the park. Watching them. Marcus did not move. Neither did Darius. The man in gray continued toward the meeting point. Whitaker opened his door. Stay in character, Marcus murmured. Heavy footsteps crossed the grass. Darius looked down at his hands. This could complicate things. Marcus watched Whitaker approaching in the coffee shop reflection. Only if we let it. Whitaker stopped directly in front of the bench and looked from Marcus to Darius with an expression that suggested he had already reached a conclusion before asking a single question. Afternoon, he said. Marcus raised his eyes. Officer. Whitaker glanced at the bag near Darius's feet, then back at both men. What are you two doing here? Marcus looked toward the lake, then calmly back at him. Sitting in a public park. Whitaker's jaw shifted slightly. The sunlight still moved through the branches. The children still played. The basketball kept bouncing. Yet in the space around that bench, the entire afternoon had suddenly changed. Whitaker let the silence linger for a moment, as though waiting for one of them to become nervous enough to give him something useful. Marcus did not. Darius did not either, though the younger agent could feel the tension sharpening beneath the ordinary sounds of the park. The man in the gray jacket was still moving toward the center path, now less than 60 yards from the planned meeting point. Every second mattered. Whitaker looked down at the small bag beside Darius's shoes. Whose is that? Darius answered evenly. Mine. What is in it? Personal items. Whitaker gave a short, skeptical nod. Open it. Darius looked at Marcus before answering. Are you asking, or are you ordering? That was enough to change Whitaker's expression. The officer took one slow step closer. I am telling you to cooperate. Marcus kept his voice calm. Officer, is there a reason you approached us? Whitaker looked at him with visible irritation. We have had complaints about suspicious activity. In this area? What kind of suspicious activity? Marcus asked. People hanging around, watching cars, making residents uncomfortable. Darius almost reacted, but Marcus gave the smallest shake of his head. Their instructions were clear. Stay quiet. Stay ordinary. Protect the operation. Whitaker continued. Identification. Both of you. Marcus rested his hands loosely on his knees. Are we being detained? The question seemed to land harder than it should have. Whitaker's jaw tightened. Why are you making this difficult? Marcus looked at him directly. I am asking what the legal basis is. Nearby, the woman with the golden retriever had stopped completely now. The father near the basketball court had moved closer to his children, but kept watching. A young man on the walking path held his phone chest high, the camera pointed toward the bench. Darius noticed all of it. He also noticed something more important. The gray-jacketed man had slowed down. Marcus, he said quietly. Marcus did not turn his head. I see him. A faint voice came through the concealed earpiece. Elena Brooks sounded controlled but urgent. Target is scanning the park. Maintain cover. Whitaker heard none of it. He pointed toward Darius's bag. Open it now. Darius inhaled slowly. Inside were ordinary clothes, a water bottle, and carefully concealed equipment that could expose the operation if Whitaker searched deeply enough. Marcus knew they were approaching the edge. "Officer," Marcus said, "we are sitting peacefully in a public place. We have not threatened anyone, disturbed anyone, or interfered with anyone." Whitaker folded his arms. "People like you always think you can talk your way around basic cooperation." The words hung there. Not loud, not dramatic. Worse because of how casually they were delivered. Darius's eyes hardened. Marcus remained still. He had heard versions of that sentence before, spoken in different cities by different people wearing different expressions. He had learned that anger could be honest and still be strategically useless. Whitaker mistook Marcus's silence for surrender. "Stand up." Marcus looked toward the coffee kiosk reflection. The man in gray had stopped again. He was no longer checking his phone. He was watching. Marcus rose slowly. Darius followed. Whitaker seemed satisfied, as if obedience had confirmed something in his mind. Then Marcus noticed the officer glance past them toward the west parking lot. It lasted less than a second. A casual look. Almost nothing. But Marcus had spent 20 years learning to notice almost nothing. Whitaker looked at the gray-jacketed man, and the gray-jacketed man looked back. Darius caught it too. Their eyes met for the briefest moment. No words passed between the two agents. None were needed. The encounter had just become something else. Marcus did not look at Darius again. He did not need to. The brief exchange between Whitaker and the man in the gray jacket had lasted barely a second, but both agents had seen it, and both understood that coincidence had just become a question. Whitaker pointed toward the open space beside the bench. "Step over there." Marcus complied without hurry. Darius followed, keeping his hands visible and his breathing steady. The officer seemed almost disappointed by their calmness. "You two have identification?" he asked again. Marcus answered, "We already asked whether we are being detained." Whitaker gave a thin smile. "And I told you to cooperate." The distinction mattered. Marcus knew it. Darius knew it. Whitaker either did not understand it or did not care. Across the park, the man in gray had stopped near a row of vending machines, pretending to study his phone. Through the concealed earpiece, Elena Brooks spoke in a low voice. "Target has paused. Possible compromise. Do not expose." Marcus felt the weight of those words settle over the moment. Months of surveillance, financial records, encrypted messages, and carefully protected sources had led them to this afternoon. If the target realized federal agents were watching, the entire network could disappear before sunset. Whitaker stepped closer to Darius. "Turn around." Darius remained still. "For what purpose?" "For officer safety. We have made no threat." Whitaker's eyes narrowed. "You want to keep arguing?" Darius's expression tightened, but Marcus spoke before he could answer. "Darius." Just his name. Nothing more. It was enough. Darius exhaled slowly and turned as instructed. Whitaker appeared satisfied again, as if every act of restraint confirmed his assumptions. Marcus watched him carefully. There was something rehearsed in the officer's behavior now, something that did not match a simple patrol stop. Whitaker kept glancing toward the west side of the park. Not constantly, not obviously, but often enough. Marcus shifted his attention toward the coffee kiosk window. The reflection showed the gray-jacketed man moving again, this time toward the parking lot instead of the planned meeting point. Elena's voice returned. "Target changing direction. All teams hold." Darius heard it too. His shoulders stiffened. Whitaker reached for his radio, then stopped before touching it. That small hesitation caught Marcus's attention. An ordinary officer dealing with two supposedly suspicious men would normally communicate with dispatch. Whitaker had not done so. No call for backup. No request for identification check. No description transmitted over the radio. Nothing. Marcus's thoughts sharpened. The stop was becoming less random by the second. "Officer Whitaker," Marcus said, reading the nameplate on his uniform. "Did someone ask you to come over here?" Whitaker's face changed almost imperceptibly. "What kind of question is that?" "A simple one. You should worry less about me and more about yourself." Marcus held his gaze. Behind Whitaker, the man in gray reached the edge of the parking lot and slowed beside the same gray sedan he had arrived in. Darius finally looked directly at Marcus. This time the message in his eyes was clear. They might lose him. Marcus heard Elena say, 30 seconds to decision point. Whitaker reached toward the handcuffs on his belt. "I have had enough of this." Marcus remained perfectly still. The sunlight had shifted lower now, stretching the shadows across the grass. The basketball court had gone quiet. More people were watching. The young man with the phone had moved closer, recording openly. Whitaker noticed him and frowned, but did not change course. Hands where I can see them. Marcus slowly raised his hands. Darius did the same. Somewhere beneath the ordinary noise of the park, Marcus could hear his own pulse, steady and measured. He had two problems now. One wore a gray jacket and was walking away. The other stood 5 feet in front of him wearing a badge. And Marcus was beginning to believe they were connected. Whitaker's hand rested near the cuffs as Marcus measured the distance between the bench, the parking lot, and the man in gray. 30 seconds was not much time, but it was enough to make one bad decision permanent. Darius understood that too. His eyes stayed forward, but his attention was divided between Whitaker and the gray sedan near the west lot. Elena Brooks spoke again through the concealed earpiece. Target is 20 yards from vehicle. No confirmed exchange. Maintain cover if possible. Marcus felt the pressure tighten. If they identified themselves now, Whitaker might finally back away, but the sudden appearance of federal credentials in the middle of the park would almost certainly warn the target. If they stayed silent, they risked letting Whitaker push the encounter even further. It was not a choice between dignity and submission. It was a choice between ending one problem quickly and protecting an investigation that could affect dozens of people they had never met. Whitaker looked at Marcus. Last chance. Identification. Marcus answered calmly. We are not refusing lawful cooperation. We are asking what you believe we have done. Whitaker gave a short laugh without humor. You have been sitting here watching cars, watching people, acting like you own the place. Darius finally spoke. That is not illegal. Whitaker turned toward him. I did not ask you. The words came faster now. His patience was slipping, but Marcus noticed something else. Whitaker still had not contacted dispatch. No request for names. No report of suspicious persons. No routine radio traffic explaining why he was holding 2 men in a public park. The silence from his police radio was becoming louder than anything he said. Marcus looked past him toward the gray sedan. The target had stopped beside the driver's door. He was not getting in. He was waiting. 10 seconds to. Decision point, Elena said. Darius's hands remained visible, but Marcus could see the frustration in his face. We can end this, Darius murmured. Marcus knew exactly what he meant. 1 credential, 1 badge, 1 sentence. Done. But Marcus shook his head slightly. Not yet. Whitaker heard him. There it is again. Not yet what? Marcus looked directly at him. You should ask yourself why you are here before you make this worse. For the first time, Whitaker's confidence flickered. Only for a moment. Then it returned stronger, almost defensive. You do not get to tell me how to do my job. Marcus replied. Then do it properly. The young man filming from the path had moved closer. The woman with the golden retriever now stood nearly still, watching with concern. The basketball had stopped bouncing entirely. The park had not become silent, but the space around them had. Whitaker seemed aware of the audience now, and instead of calming down, he appeared more determined to prove that he was in control. He pointed toward the cruiser. Both of you are coming with me until I sort this out. Darius looked at Marcus. The gray-jacketed man opened the driver's door of the sedan. Elena's voice came through immediately. Target preparing to leave. Marcus felt the entire operation balance on the next few seconds. Then he saw it again. Whitaker glanced toward the sedan. This time it was not a casual look. It was quick, deliberate, almost impatient. And the man in gray paused with one hand on the car door, as if he had been waiting for some kind of signal. Marcus's expression did not change, but inside, the question became certainty. Whitaker was not merely interfering with the surveillance. Somehow, intentionally or not, he was connected to it. Darius, Marcus said softly. Stay with me. Whitaker reached for the cuffs. Darius held his position. The gray sedan remained exactly where it was. And Marcus made his decision. They would not reveal themselves. Not yet. If Whitaker wanted to keep talking, Marcus was going to let him. Because every word, every glance, every choice the officer made from this point forward might tell them more than a badge ever could. The handcuffs clicked into place around Marcus Reed's wrists, and for the first time that afternoon, Officer Ryan Whitaker seemed completely satisfied. To him, the situation had finally become simple. 2 black men on a park bench had questioned his authority, and now one of them was in custody while the other stood beside him under command. What Whitaker could not see was that Marcus had stopped thinking about the arrest almost entirely. His attention was somewhere else. The man in the gray jacket still stood beside the sedan, one hand resting on the open driver's door, waiting instead of leaving. That made no sense unless he was waiting for something. Marcus turned slightly, just enough to catch Darius Cole's eyes. Darius understood immediately. Watch Whitaker. Watch the target. Remember everything. Through the concealed communication device, Elena Brooks spoke with careful urgency. Surveillance teams are holding. Gray jacket has not departed. We are recording. Marcus remained calm. Whitaker turned toward Darius. Your turn. Darius kept his hands visible. You still have not explained what law you believe we violated. Whitaker stepped closer. I do not need a lecture. Marcus watched the officer's face. Every question seemed to make Whitaker more defensive, but the anger was no longer the most important detail. The important detail was timing. Each time the gray-jacketed man moved, Whitaker reacted. Not dramatically. A glance. A pause. A slight change in posture. Separately, each movement meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern. Marcus had built cases from less. Whitaker motioned toward the patrol vehicle. Move over there. Marcus obeyed slowly. Darius followed. Behind them, the young man with the phone continued recording. Whitaker noticed and called out, Stay back. The young man did not approach, but he did not lower the phone either. Marcus quietly said, Keep recording. Whitaker turned sharply. What did you say? Marcus met his eyes. Nothing you need to worry about. That answer irritated him, exactly as Marcus expected. Whitaker began talking again, explaining that suspicious behavior gave him the right to investigate, that people in the neighborhood had complained, that experienced officers recognized trouble before ordinary citizens did. The more he spoke, the more details he supplied. Marcus listened. No dispatch call. No named complainant. No description matching Marcus or Darius. No explanation for why Whitaker had driven directly toward their bench. Then Darius noticed something near Whitaker's uniform pocket. A cellular telephone vibrated once. Whitaker looked down. He did not answer it, but his eyes moved immediately toward the gray sedan. Darius's expression changed. Marcus saw it. Elena spoke again. Possible communication event. We have it on camera. The man in gray finally stepped away from the sedan and began walking back toward the center of the park. Whitaker watched him for half a second too long. Marcus felt the final piece settle into place. He leaned slightly toward Darius and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. Let him keep talking. Darius understood. Their mission had changed. They were no longer trying only to preserve surveillance. They were watching Whitaker reveal himself one choice at a time. Whitaker stepped in front of Marcus again. You really think you are smarter than everyone here, do you not? Marcus looked at him with the same quiet expression he had worn from the beginning. No, Officer Whitaker. I think you are telling us more than you realize. The confidence disappeared from Whitaker's face for just a moment. In the distance, the man in gray stopped walking. Elena's voice came through one final time. Marcus, we have probable connection. Continue if safe. Marcus looked at Whitaker, then at Darius. The arrest had started as an obstacle. Now it was evidence. Whitaker stared at Marcus for a long second, trying to decide whether the words were a bluff. Marcus gave him nothing. No smile. No anger. No explanation. Darius remained beside the cruiser, calm on the surface, but every instinct he had was focused on the gray-jacketed man, now standing near the center path. Elena Brooks spoke quietly through the concealed earpiece. We have visual confirmation of repeated contact behavior. Hold position. Secondary team moving into place. Whitaker could not hear her, but he seemed to sense that control was slipping away from him. You think this is some kind of game? He asked. Marcus answered, No. Then stop acting like you know something I do not. Marcus held his gaze. That is exactly what I know. The words landed softly, but they changed the air around them. Whitaker's expression tightened. Darius watched the officer's right hand move toward his pocket again when the cellular telephone vibrated. This time Whitaker checked the screen for less than a second, then looked toward the man in gray. The reaction was immediate. Too immediate. Marcus noticed. Darius noticed. Elena noticed. Message event confirmed, she said. Marcus, we are ready when you are. Marcus did not respond verbally. The man in gray began walking toward the east entrance, moving faster now, but not running. Two people who had looked like ordinary park visitors changed direction behind him. Federal surveillance. Whitaker saw them too, though he did not understand who they were yet. "Both of you stay right here," he said, suddenly distracted. Darius looked at Marcus. This was the moment. Marcus gave the smallest nod. Darius spoke clearly. "Officer Whitaker, before you continue, I strongly recommend you contact your supervisor." Whitaker gave a short laugh. "I do not need permission to do my job. That is not why I said it." Whitaker's face hardened again. Enough. Marcus took one measured breath. He had allowed the officer every opportunity to explain himself. He had listened to the excuses, the vague claims, the changing reasons, the unexplained glances, and the silent telephone alerts. Now the operation had what it needed. "Elena," Marcus said quietly. Whitaker frowned. "Who are you talking to?" Marcus looked past him toward the east path. Now, the change happened without shouting. A dark sport utility vehicle near the curb opened its doors. Two plainclothes federal agents stepped out. Another pair approached the man in gray from opposite sides of the path. The man stopped. The ordinary afternoon suddenly revealed how carefully it had been watched. Whitaker turned in confusion. "What is this?" Darius reached slowly toward the inside of his jacket. Whitaker immediately pointed at him. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Darius stopped and looked at Marcus. Marcus answered with complete calm. "Let him see." Darius carefully removed a leather credential case and opened it. The gold federal badge caught the late afternoon light. Whitaker stared at it without speaking. Darius's voice remained even. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent Darius Cole." The color seemed to drain from Whitaker's expression. His eyes moved from the badge to Marcus, then back again. Marcus lifted his cuffed wrists slightly. "Supervisory Special Agent Marcus Reed." For several seconds, Whitaker said nothing. The woman with the golden retriever covered her mouth. The young man filming lowered his phone only slightly, still recording. Whitaker finally found his voice. "You should have told me." Marcus looked at him steadily. "You never gave us a reason to trust you with that information." Whitaker glanced toward the man in gray, now surrounded by federal agents. Then he looked back at Marcus and seemed to understand something worse. The problem was not that he had detained two federal agents. The problem was that the agents had been watching him too. Elena Brooks approached from across the lawn, credentials visible in her hand. She stopped several feet away. "Officer Whitaker," she said, "step away from the agents." Whitaker hesitated. Elena's voice stayed calm. "Now." He stepped back. Marcus looked toward Darius. Neither man celebrated. Neither needed to. The truth had finally entered the conversation, and Whitaker was about to discover that the badge he had relied on all afternoon could not protect him from what came next. Elena Brooks did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The authority in her tone was enough to change the entire scene. Whitaker took another step back while Darius carefully closed his credential case and Marcus stood with his wrists still restrained, watching the officer process what had just happened. Around them, Riverside Memorial Park had become strangely quiet. The children near the playground had stopped shouting. The father by the basketball court was no longer pretending not to watch. The young man with the phone kept recording from a safe distance, his expression fixed on Whitaker. Elena approached Marcus first and looked at the cuffs. "We will get those off." Then she turned toward Whitaker. "Do not touch your radio. Do not leave the area." Whitaker stared at her. "I was conducting a lawful investigation." Elena's expression did not change. "Then there should be no problem reviewing it." The sentence was calm, but Whitaker seemed to hear the weight behind it. Darius looked toward the east path, where two federal agents were speaking with the man in the gray jacket. The target had not escaped. More importantly, the connection they had suspected was no longer theoretical. Elena continued, "Your body camera footage will be preserved. Your cellular telephone activity during this stop will be documented. Your dispatch history will be reviewed." Whitaker's face tightened. "You cannot just take my personal telephone." "I did not say we were taking it," Elena replied. "I said the activity would be reviewed through the proper process." Marcus listened without interrupting. This was the part people often misunderstood about accountability. It was not supposed to arrive as rage. It was supposed to arrive as procedure. Records, timelines, witness statements, video, facts placed beside facts until excuses had nowhere left to hide. Whitaker looked toward Marcus. "You could have told me who you were." Marcus answered quietly, "And you could have told us why you approached us." Whitaker opened his mouth, then stopped. Darius stepped closer. You said there were complaints. Who made them? Whitaker looked away. I received information. From dispatch. Darius asked. No answer. From a citizen? Still no answer. Marcus watched the silence form around him. Earlier, Whitaker had filled the air with certainty. Now every missing answer seemed louder than his voice had been. Elena turned slightly as another federal agent approached from the sidewalk and spoke quietly to her. She listened, then looked back at Whitaker. We have confirmed a communication link between your telephone activity and a device associated with the man in the gray jacket. Whitaker's expression changed instantly. That does not mean anything. Elena replied. Maybe it does not. That is what the investigation will determine. The word investigation seemed to affect him more than accusation would have. Marcus understood why. Accusations could be denied. Investigations created records. The gray-jacketed man was escorted toward an unmarked vehicle for questioning. Darius watched him go, then looked at Marcus. We almost lost the operation. Marcus nodded once. Almost. Elena signaled to another agent, who approached Marcus and removed the cuffs. The quiet click of metal openings sounded completely different from the sound it had made earlier. Whitaker heard it too. Marcus slowly lowered his hands and rubbed his wrists, not dramatically, just enough to restore circulation. Then he looked at Whitaker. This was never about embarrassing you. Whitaker said nothing. It is about finding out why you were here, why you never called dispatch, why you kept watching that man, and why two citizens sitting peacefully on a bench became your priority. Whitaker glanced toward the people still watching. For the first time that afternoon, he seemed aware that the park was full of witnesses. Elena stepped beside Marcus. Your captain is on the way. Whitaker looked at her sharply. You called my supervisor? Elena held his gaze. No, Officer Whitaker. The evidence did. Captain Thomas Keller arrived 11 minutes later, stepping from an unmarked sedan with the expression of a man who already knew the afternoon had become much larger than a routine complaint. By then, federal agents had secured the relevant evidence. The man in the gray jacket had been separated for questioning, and the people who had gathered around the park were beginning to understand that they had witnessed something more complicated than a simple police stop. Keller spoke first with Elena Brooks, then with Marcus Reed and Darius Cole. He listened without interrupting as Marcus described the timeline from the moment Whitaker approached the bench to the moment the communication pattern became impossible to ignore. Keller's face tightened when Elena explained that Whitaker had never contacted dispatch before or during the encounter. It tightened further when she mentioned the apparent connection between telephone activity and the device associated with the gray-jacketed man. Whitaker tried to explain himself. He said he had been acting on instinct. He said the man had appeared suspicious. He said the situation had escalated because they refused to cooperate the way he expected. Marcus listened to every word and then asked one question. What exactly made us suspicious before you spoke to us? Whitaker looked at him but did not answer. The silence stretched. Darius folded his arms and looked toward the old wooden bench under the elm trees. Nothing about it had changed. The same chipped armrest, the same faded paint, the same view of the walking path and the west parking lot. Yet somehow that bench had become the center of a case that might now reach far beyond one afternoon. Keller finally spoke. Officer Whitaker, you are relieved of field duty pending review. There was no applause. Marcus did not smile. Darius did not celebrate. Elena simply documented the statement and continued coordinating with the investigative team. Justice, Marcus had learned, rarely looked dramatic when it was real. It looked like evidence being preserved. It looked like supervisors asking questions that had been avoided for years. It looked like old complaints being reopened because one new incident exposed a pattern nobody could ignore anymore. In the days that followed, investigators reviewed Whitaker's records, prior stops, body camera footage, and communications. Several earlier complaints from black residents, once treated as isolated disputes, were examined again in light of the new evidence. The federal case connected to the gray-jacketed man also continued, now with a clearer picture of who had been feeding information into the network. Marcus and Darius returned to Riverside Memorial Park 1 week later, not for an operation, but because Marcus wanted to see the place without surveillance screens, hidden radios, or a ticking clock in his head. They sat on the same bench as evening sunlight settled across the grass. For a while, neither man said anything. Darius finally looked at Marcus. You ever think about how close we came to blowing the whole thing? Marcus nodded. Every day. Darius looked toward the parking lot. And how close he came to walking away from it. Marcus was quiet for a moment. That is the part people miss. Darius turned toward him. Marcus continued. He thought the badge gave him the right to decide who belonged, who looked suspicious, who had to explain themselves. But authority is not proof of judgment. It is a responsibility to use judgment carefully. Darius gave a slow nod. A family walked past them toward the lake. Somewhere near the basketball court, a ball hit pavement in a familiar, steady rhythm. Marcus leaned back and looked across the park. He saw two black men sitting on a bench and decided he already knew their story. That was his first mistake. Darius glanced at him. Marcus finished quietly. Thinking his badge could erase the truth was his last.